Well, there's a brand new edition of Kill Team, and so there's a pretty good chance that you might be going out to your local game store for your first ever Kill Team night. Today, we're going to let you know everything you can expect, some pitfalls to avoid, and how to handle yourself with your first time in public. So it can be a pretty daunting thing to sign up for a Kill Team event or to hop into a Discord and start looking for games and then to show up and play a pretty competitively natured game against a total stranger. And so what we want to do today is talk about what you can expect, why it's not that scary, and, kind of how to handle yourself the first time you go to a game store to play one of these things. One thing to remember here is that it doesn't really need to be scary. Everyone is there to have a good time. And while it definitely feels intimidating walking into a room where people already have relationships and people they play with, and there's games going on and it feels intimidating, it really doesn't need to be. Everyone's there for the same reason. Everyone's there just to have a good time and play this game that we love. And it's worth remembering that at the heart of this, don't take anything too personally or assign too much of your value and self-worth to game store interactions. Sometimes things are weird and whatever. You can you got to let it roll off your back and kind of move on to the next game. But what we're going to start with here is kind of the preparation of everything you need to bring with you.
So usually when you're heading out to a game night or you're going to your first tournament or whatever, a few things are pretty much always going to be essential. You're going to need your team.
Yep.
Whether you're playing Kill Team, Warcry, Star Wars Shatterpoint, any minis game requires minis.
Yeah.
That's just what it is. Unless you're getting loaned a team from a friend, which, might be happening, and that'd be awesome. You're going to need terrain for sure and a board. Sometimes if you're going to a store, they might have terrain on hand.
Yeah, they often will.
Depending on the store, the quality of the terrain for the game you're playing sometimes it's pretty questionable. So it's never a bad thing to bring your own terrain just so you know what you're going to be able to have and what you're going to be able to use. You're going to need probably a copy of the rules, whether that's, a PDF on your phone, an app, the hard copy of a rule book, not only the core rules for the game, but your team rules. For games like Kill Team, you're definitely going to want your own set of dice.
Yep.
And you're going to want your tokens.
Yeah.
Not all games use tokens, but I think most minis games use some kind of tokens. There's going to be some that might go specifically with your team. There's going to be some that are just general use, objective markers or ways to track health. Sometimes you can use dice for this, but no matter what, you're going to want all these tools that you need to play. Measuring tools included in that. Definitely don't want to get there and have to be oh, can I use your measuring stick?
Yeah,
because people usually are going to be pretty nice about it, but it's just annoying to have to pass it back and forth and always keep asking for it. It's just it adds time. It just adds awkwardness.
Definitely. And with Kill Team, there's a pretty specific system of measurement, and the game kind of requires the specific tools. In my opinion, measuring tapes aren't great for Kill Team. I think the tools really do work. I don't think you need to get the official ones. There's lots of ways to get other versions of the same thing, but measuring gauges are an important part of packing for a Kill Team event.
Kind of related to tokens. Not all games again need this, but for Kill Team, you definitely want your cards. Not all cards are mandatory. Things like Scouting Skep can be done with cards, or they can be done with dice.
Yeah.
But especially now, with the primary op being a thing, it's hidden information that is revealed at the end of the game. And if you don't have your card, it could be very easy for your opponent to say, you could have just changed your mind halfway through the game to whatever favors you. It just removes any ambiguity if you have those cards. So at least if you print off a piece of paper and put it in a card
sleeve,
like a card sleeve or something, some way to track your primary op is going to be essential this edition, I think, just to remove any doubt of feels bads. Any other mandatory cards?
I don't think so. I think that, this game is kind of becoming more and more paperless, which for many people is a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, in the past at events I've played in for the last edition, it's just there's a mountain of cards and everything all over the place. And it is nice to see that isn't happening anymore. A few of the apps, the Kill Team score tracking apps, do have ways to deal with the primary op. But all of the ones I've seen so far require both person using the same phone. And that's always kind of awkward. I think 3 cards for the primary op are important.
Yeah. Also your equipment.
Yeah.
For this edition of Kill Team, equipment being placed on the board is a big part of it. Sometimes you're not going to need any. But if you don't bring your own equipment, you might just be SOL.
Yeah.
And if you're okay with that, then fine. But it's something to be aware of.
So I think that's all the things
Yeah.
you need to bring these days. I mean, everyone kind of has their own process. I don't mind having a notepad sometimes, depending on the team I'm playing. But, you know, you'll play a few games. Don't overpack your first few, even though you will anyway, because we all do. And you'll kind of figure out what you need. All right, so let's talk about the type of game you can expect with a kind of normal pickup game against a stranger. So typically, in my experience, if you're not coming into it with a specific goal, the default is approved ops. For better or for worse, matched play has become the de facto kind of way to play these games. And so I think you can expect that unless you're kind of going in looking for joint ops or something like that.
Yeah, if you haven't discussed the game mode, I think it's safe to assume you're playing approved ops.
One important thing to think about is how you describe your team and how you describe yourself as a player to a prospective opponent. So, you know, if I'm playing my Corsairs, for instance, and I'm playing against someone that's never played against them or has not played a lot of kill team, I'll say something like, you know, they've got a lot of movement. They don't have a ton of like really tricky plays, but they move faster than you expect, and they've got a few guns that can really hurt you pretty hard, and I'll point them out.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing I'll say more about myself than my team is like, you know, I'm not terribly competitive, but I, you know, try to make good plays and I more or less know what I'm doing. I think these sort of rule zero conversations can really help you find the right opponent for you. But at the end of the day, we're all just kind of playing our own game here, and everyone approaches this a little bit differently, and you will end up in situations where your goals for how to enjoy Kill Team don't line up with your opponent, and that's something that you need to just kind of be okay with. If you're a really competitive player, you might end up in a game against someone that isn't that, and you won't have the most competitively satisfying experience of your life, and vice versa. You know, you might end up against someone that, you know, just gets their jollies by scoring maximum points and having you score minimum points. And while I personally find that to be an annoying interaction, you got to be able to just move on and not let it kind of sour you to Kill Team in general or sour your whole experience. The game ends and then the game has to end, you know? It's easy to kind of carry these things with you, but it's important not to. And so there's a lot of etiquette that's largely unspoken, but there's some kind of key points that are important to be cognizant of. So one big thing that comes up a lot in Kill Team, and I mean, it'll probably come up in all war games, but because Kill Team is so granular with movement and positioning, it comes up a lot, is something that I'll refer to as playing by intention. So what I mean by that is like sometimes you'll make a move and you can say to your opponent, I'm putting this gunner here so that he can't be charged by this guy, or I'm putting this gunner here so that, you know, he's within an inch of this barricade, so I'm assuming he's in cover and you don't have like a way to turn that off. And I think that then becomes incumbent on your opponent to say, actually, I do have something with Seek Light, or, you know, I do have something that can flip his order, or this guy has fly so I can charge over that barricade, whatever. And so in a game of Kill Team, I think it's impossible, and I really mean impossible, to measure everything down to the micron and to be able to like anticipate every single interaction. And this is not for like high level tournaments where I believe it is rightfully 100% expected that your opponent is like on their own. And if they make a mistake, it's your job as a competitive player to punish that mistake. But this isn't the situation I'm talking about. So if you're playing against someone and they say, yeah, I'm just going here assuming I can't be charged.
One other thing I think is really important here is, you know, you're playing another human being. You want to respect their time.
Yes.
And you might be a new player. You might be going out and you don't really have that firm of a grasp on the team. And you might be hyper fixating on, I don't want to make a mistake. And I want to analyze every play because I want to, you know, give myself the best chance of winning. And that's fair. However, you have to be respectful that the person sitting across from you has a life.
Yep.
They might have kids. They might have early work the next morning. They might have, you know, who knows what. You know, they have to go walk their dog in 20 minutes and they want to get home. And I think it's important to sometimes be okay with, yeah, this might not be the most optimal play. That's okay, because I can't sit here for 20 minutes for each move and my opponent's checking their watch and like yawning. And I think you just have to let it go and learn from your mistakes for next time.
That's true. But one thing is that I think this more refers to like on your turn, you can speed up a bit. Like,
Yeah.
don't get bogged down. However, I do think on your opponent's turn, don't be afraid to ask them to slow down if they're doing things too fast for you to understand. You know, if someone says like, "Oh, I've got a just a scratch, so I'm going to remove that," and I'm just going to do this, and this, and then you don't know what the ploys mean or anything. You can 100% say like, "Whoa, hold on, what was that? What is that rule? Can I look at that?" Don't be afraid to slow down the game on your opponent's turn, but you have so much more license to do that when you're not slowing it down on your own turn by just like staring at the table silently thinking. I had an interaction at a game store once where my opponent had some weird dice and he was rolling them and then removing them from the tray really quickly before I could like really wrap my head around what happened. And although I don't think that he was doing like sleight of hand cheating, I wish that I had said like, can you slow down a second, please? And he was also like, rolling some things, like rolling defense dice before I rolled attacks. And don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. Whether or not you're a new player, if your opponent is like doing stuff too frenetically, you absolutely are well within your rights to say like, sorry, can you just slow down a bit? Like, and that's not an aggressive thing or anything like that. It's not accusing them of cheating, but it's hard to keep track of everything on your own team, let alone your opponent's. And so don't be afraid to like ask for clarification on like, oh, how are you discarding that die? How are you reducing that damage?
Yeah.
Like you're allowed to do that, especially if this is your first time. Like, don't be afraid to stick up for yourself.
Mm-hmm. One other like small thing here. If you're ever going to touch someone else's minis, ask first.
100%.
You never touch someone else's minis without asking. People spend a lot of time painting these, sometimes to like a very artistic level.
Yeah.
People take great pride in their minis, and they might not want your Dorito dust fingers touching their stuff. So just ask.
One workaround though, if you grab it with your mouth, you don't have to ask. Another important etiquette thing here, this is kind of a general rule in any game, whether it's like a nerd game like this, or if you're into like bowling or laser tag or something. Win with grace and lose with dignity. Whether you're like totally on fire destroying someone, or if you're getting destroyed, you don't want your reaction to that to ruin your opponent's night.
Yeah.
Like if you're, slamming the table and having a big raucous reaction to every time you roll a 6, your opponent is going to feel bad about that. And similarly, like if you're getting tilted, and we all get tilted, but if you're like having a visibly terrible time, and not because your opponent is being a jerk, but just because you're losing, you're just not being a very good opponent. And, you would expect the same out of your opponent to not suck the joy out of your victory. And so that's a really important thing to remember. And it's hard and it takes practice. And we have a lot of practice losing, and it's still like it gets under your skin sometimes, especially when it's like an avoidable loss for me. Those are the ones that really sting when it's like, oh, if I had just not been so stupid, I might have won this game. But really do your best to not let it ruin your opponent's time, because then, it's just one less person that's going to want to play with you.
One thing kind of related to that, and I know Victor and I have both also been culprits here. Dice do be dice.
Yeah.
But it really sucks when you blame the dice. If you're playing someone and they've gone through a hard-earned victory and they feel good, they're like, yeah, I just pulled off a win. That was great. And you're like, oh man, the dice sucked for me.
Yeah.
You might not think anything negative by saying, oh, I'm not saying you played badly.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you didn't deserve it. I'm just saying, oh, my dice sucked. But you're kind of saying you only won because I got unlucky. And that is just like not the best. And especially in a game like Kill Team where there's so much room for like personal tactics and strategy and all that. I personally believe that no matter how bad your dice were, unless you literally rolled only ones, like there's always something you could have done.
Yeah.
Right? I really feel like, yeah, you might have rolled badly, but you still could have put yourself in a position where that didn't even matter.
Yeah.
So I think also blaming dice all the time is a way to never improve. Like if you just say I lost because of dice, maybe the dice didn't help you, but I'm sure there's something that you could have done that would have helped you play better.
So another thing that comes up quite a lot is takebacks. And this is kind of a bit of a gray area. I'm a pretty kind of anything goes guy across the table. Like, I think the general rule is like you can kind of take something back if dice haven't been rolled yet, to
an extent.
Yeah,
I think if it's the most recent thing that you've done, you're good. I think if it's like 4 activations ago,
oh yeah,
even if dice have been rolled You're SOL.
Yeah, or something like, oh, I realized that I could have negated one of those dice, and then that way this guy would still be alive. Like, I think unless you do it like right as you're pulling him off the table, that ship is kind of
Yeah, and the other thing is like this game and lots of like all these miniature games we play, most of them are fairly complex in terms of, like they're not Monopoly.
Right.
Most of them are fairly complex. There's lots of different rules that interact in different ways. And because there are so many different teams, a lot of rules interactions rarely come up.
Yeah.
And so you're not used to seeing them. I think there are so many times where players make mistakes, and it's just part of a game like this.
Yeah.
Even at the highest level tables.
Famously.
Even at the highest level tournaments, mistakes happen. And I'm willing to bet many, many games at highest tournament performance, mistakes happen and they just don't get caught.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's only 2 players playing and they just don't get caught. Sometimes, games are played and they're streamed and they get noticed, or sometimes later, a TO will come by and notice something. Oftentimes it's too late in the game and you just got to roll with it.
Yeah.
Or, if you realize in Turning Point 4 that for the whole game you've been playing a rule wrong and you should have got extra rerolls or who knows what, that's just part of the game. And also, if your opponent does it, 99% chance they're not trying to cheat.
Yeah.
People just make mistakes. These games are so complex and we're not computers.
Yeah.
It's not a video game.
And it's a new edition.
It just happens.
Yeah.
Like you just got to be okay with that. If you're playing these games, doesn't matter if it's your first time playing or you're playing for a golden ticket. Like it doesn't matter.
And another thing with Kill Team is everything you do ideally is influenced by everything your opponent does, right? Like, and so if there is something where someone's trying to take something back that happened a couple turns ago, it's like, it's hard because if they say like, oh, actually he would be here, it's like, well, then I wouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
And it's not like, I play a lot of Commander and go to Commander nights, and sometimes it's like, you'll have a card that says like, every time a creature is destroyed, gain a life, and you miss it for like a turn or two, and then say like, oh, sorry guys, like 3 creatures were destroyed. Do you mind if I just like add 3 life? Like, I think everyone's kind of cool with that. But in Kill Team, I think if you don't catch something by the next activation, you kind of just have to let it go and tell yourself like, I'll catch it next time.
The butterfly effect has happened, and it's a whole different game.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't turn it back.
And so much of it is like a kind of hidden plan that only you know. And it's like, even if you do take everything back to 4 activations ago, your opponent then knows what you would do for 4 activations. And so, I kind of let people do everything, but I don't really take things back beyond like immediately doing them. Like, I'm going to move to here and dash. Oh, actually, you know what? Sorry, that's stupid. I'm going to do something else. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
But like once dice are rolled or once the opponent has like activated something else, in my opinion, the ship has sailed.
Yeah.
And the good thing is none of this matters. And so if you lose, you've learned a lesson and you can move on with your life. So that kind of leads into our next thing, which is what do you do if you think your opponent is cheating? And
oh, that's spicy.
Yeah. And
you key their car.
Yeah, exactly. You smash their models. No, so I think that like cheating happens a lot in Kill Team. And I think there's kind of 2 categories that it needs to be broken into first. Intentional and unintentional.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll make a 3rd category of like not technically cheating, but pushing it, So first of all, let's talk about unintentional, because that's easy. That's like, your opponent gets a rule wrong that, like they re-roll a die twice or something like that. And you say, oh, you can't do that. And then
or like they're playing Vespids and they forget to use a communion point or something.
Yeah, right. Or they fly too far. Yeah, something like that.
Or they put their model in hiding and then they jump out 2 inches from you.
Yeah, right. And so like, accidental cheating, it's even stupid to call it cheating, but like,
misplaying to your advantage.
Yeah, misplaying to your advantage, exactly. Or like misunderstanding the rules in a positive way happens all the time. And the thing is like we do it and we've got an audience, and so everything we do gets caught by people. But what that tells me is that like I think in so many games of Kill Team, like things just go without being noticed, and it's because not everyone knows every team, and so like if I'm playing Vespids and my opponent's playing Wormblade and he's never played Vespids and I've never played Wormblade, if he misunderstands a rule of his and does it, I'm like, yeah, go, whatever. Like I don't know how your team works.
Yeah, especially now when the edition's like a month old.
Yeah, exactly. And so like that happens all the time, and if you catch it, I think you can give your opponent the benefit of the doubt and assume it was an accident and politely correct them and move on with your life.
Yeah.
Then there's the other version, which is that you think your opponent is intentionally cheating. So maybe they're giving themselves an extra base width of distance when they move, by kind of manipulating the tool, or they're not really counting everything to a full inch. Like, I think movement cheating is probably the most common. Or, they roll their dice and they quickly grab it and say, that was 7 crits. How do you handle that? And I think it really depends on, your comfort level in the situation, how high stakes the game is. If there's a TO, it's really easy because then you can just tell on them if you want to.
And you're a narc for life.
Yeah, but everyone's cool with a narc for rules. But if you're just playing like a casual pickup game, I think you really need to decide before you just have a knee-jerk reaction and teacher, he's not allowed to do that. Really decide, is it worth it? What I always think of when I'm in these situations, and I've been cheated against a lot, and I know. But I always just think to myself, okay, obviously this victory means more to this person than it does to me, and I'll just play against this. I mean, if it was ever really oh, my guy actually has 7 attacks and they hit on ones, I'd call that out. But if I see someone they obviously really want to make a charge and they're just pushing it a bit farther or something like that, I tend to let it go. But I think you're very much within your rights to say hey, how are you measuring that? Do you mind if I take a look? How are you counting that measurement?
I think the main thing here is I'm a bit more maybe on a bit toward the other side than you, where I'm you shouldn't have to lose at the expense of you're seeing this happen and you just let it. But I think the main point here over everything else is always give your opponent the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And always assume it's unintentional.
Yeah.
Because even if it's not, it doesn't hurt to approach it as if it were.
Yeah.
So I think that's the main thing.
One more thing I want to talk about is when to concede a game. So there's lots of times when you're playing a game of Kill Team where you think, oh, there's no way I could possibly win this. Believe me, I know. There's kind of a right and a wrong way to stop playing before the game is done. In my opinion, when the game is at a point where mathematically you cannot win, that's an okay time to concede. If you realize with the models I have left versus the models you have left, I can't score enough points, then I think it's okay to call the game there. I don't think
casual setting. Yeah.
I don't think there's any reason to put yourself through the torture. However, I think let your opponent make their big play. And this is kind of especially a thing in Magic, I know, is concede at sorcery speed. Mm-hmm. And so if your opponent is obviously building up some big Rube Goldberg machine of cool stuff they've got going on, it's kind of an uncool thing to before it goes off, just be oh yeah, you got it. Let them do their cool thing. But I definitely think that if the game is over, if you've got one sniper left and you're otherwise tabled against a full team, you could say yeah, you got this one and shake their hand and walk away. I don't think you need to feel bad about that. I know in a tournament, often the final score actually matters. And so, your mileage may vary there, and keep that in mind. But, I think if the game is over, there's no need to either make them hunt you down and table you for 2 turns or vice versa, or for you just to sit there and try to not get tabled. I think that's cool.
Also, half this video is just saying, don't be a dick.
That's the main thesis is don't be a dick. And if someone else is being a dick, kind of just let them.
Yeah, honestly,
yeah, that's kind of the main etiquette points. And these are very much the same for most kind of games you play. But in Kill Team, everything, because it's smaller, it just feels kind of more condensed and amplified sometimes, I think. So in Kill Team, there's a lot of kind of terms and parlance that are bandied about among Kill Team players, and there's kind of too many to get into. So if you can think of any and you're watching this game, put them in the comments. We'll highlight them. We might do a video about this later, but just know that if someone says something oh yeah, I've got a just a scratch on normals on this guy, you are well within your rights to say what the hell does that mean? If you don't understand something, ask questions.
Somehow, if you've made it to the end of this video, thanks for watching. Hopefully this helps you make it through your first real life gaming situation with another human that you don't know, or maybe you know a bit.
Yeah, just remember that you both have the same goal. You're both there trying to have a fun time playing the game you love. And as long as you're a good opponent and they're a good opponent, you'll have a good time regardless of the outcome.
Yep.
If you're doing it at a local game store, buy a can of pop and a bag of Skittles while you're there. Don't just go and spend no money because, these things need to stay
support
alive
the
somehow.
store. Yeah.
Support the store.
All right, and speaking of support, thanks to our 1 HP gangsters and mountain goats for supporting this channel. We're really, really, really feeling the love right now, appreciating the support so much. If you're not a patron, you can still support us by liking this video, commenting, and clicking the subscribe button.
Yeah.
The big red button. But I'm going to hit the big red button on this video right now. See you next time.
See you later.